Welcome everyone. I'm Lee Dance, Executive Director and founder of Global Counsel Leaders. We have a fantastic panel for you here today. This is the second day of our Future Ready GC program. And today we're talking about, just so you remember where you are right now and what you're about to hear, what traits CEOs value most in their in-house leaders. So I'm really pleased to introduce Aaron Kotok, who is our moderator today, and happy to have the others with us that are on the panel. Take it away, Aaron, and I'll be back at the end of this. Look forward to learning from you all.
Sounds great. Thank you, Lee, and thanks everybody for joining us. Really excited for what should be if preview conversations among this group are any indication, what should be an exciting and insightful conversation. I'm Aaron Kotok. I'm an executive director with Advanced Law, which many of you may know is now part of the Mitra Tech organization as well. We're a database marketplace for outside counsel. I am thrilled to be joined today by truly, and I mean this, truly two of my favorite people in the legal space, Jose Gonzalez of Equitable and Will McKinnon of Russell Reynolds. I've had the pleasure of knowing Will since a year that starts with 19. I will not disclose how it ends, but it's been a long time. And knowing Jose almost as long, but through a number of different reasons, we've had chances to work together over the years. I want to give them both a chance to introduce themselves. We've got a lot to talk about today when we think about what it is that CEOs want and need out of their general counsel. So I'll let Will kick us off with introductions. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your role and your path in the legal space.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Aaron. Great, obviously great to be working with you as well. We do go back a long time, and that the admiration is very much mutual for both of these individuals on the panel with me. So my name is Will McKinnon. I'm a partner at Russell Reynolds, and I lead the general counsel practice for Russell Reynolds in North America. And what that means is I spend my time doing public company and private company GC searches. We as a practice, we view ourselves as a boutique within a much larger search firm. There are eight senior individuals who do GC and one level below GC work. So we know the market very, very well. Across any given year, globally, we do close to 200 searches within the legal space. And before I got here, I spent 10 years with Axiom Law, which was a pioneer in sort of legal tech and disruption of the traditional law firm model. So have been 20 years touching or working in the legal industry and with other GCs. I'm not a lawyer. I can fake it pretty well, but if you push hard, you'll realize very quickly that it's just a veneer on the outside. But I have gotten to know a million of you guys over the years and really enjoy working with you.
Great. Thanks, Will. Jose.
Sure. Yes, when Lee, well, it's great to be with all of you here today. And when Lee reached out to me to be on this panel, I said, who's going to be on the panel? And she mentioned Aaron and Will. I said, well, I can't say no to either one of them. So I'm thrilled to be here with both of them and all of you. So my name's Jose Ramon Gonzalez. I'm Chief Legal Officer of Equitable Holdings. Equitable Holdings is the holding company of the Equitable Life Companies, which have been around for 160 years, focused on retirement services, annuities, and life insurance. And then we are also the holding company for another great franchise called AllianceBernstein, which is a global asset management company based in Nashville. And so I've been here as a CLO of Equitable Holdings for about almost 3 years, coming up on 3 years. We have a legal team of about 170 on the Equitable side, and covering legal, compliance, and regulatory. I also, as in my role as Chief Legal Officer of the holding company, I also have somewhat of an oversight for the law department of AllianceBernstein, which is another 120 individuals based in Nashville, as I mentioned before, and across the world. I've been general counsel now for about I started my in-house career at AIG, and I had my first in-house role about 10 years ago in 2011. And since then, I have been at one, two, three, four, four in-house. I've been general counsel of four in-house jobs, and have seen, how the profession and how the trade or the practice of being an in-house lawyer has changed throughout.
That's great. Already previewing where we're going to go first, Jose. So very much appreciate it. Also would like to point out, obviously, thankful to General Counsel leaders and to Factor for putting together this this webinar today. I'm especially thankful for Sandy, who's on the line as well, who will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A for anybody who wants to pop in with any questions for the group or for any of the individuals here. I like to say, if you're monitoring a webinar, friends don't let friends monitor the chat. So somebody else can do that and tell me what's going on, so that we can insert your questions where it makes the most sense. A bit of an agenda for the conversation. We're going to talk about the landscape for today's GCs and what has changed. Jose has already begun to hint at that. We'll talk about what it means to navigate company dynamics. What is the CEO? What is the board? What do other executives need from the general counsel? And we'll close with a conversation around whether you're in the GC role and can help others prepare for it, or you're somebody who's looking at the GC role coming up in your career. What are some of the best things that people can do in helping to themselves or others prepare for that role? So I say we get into it, and I like to start with a little bit of shared history. I mentioned Will and I worked together for an organization that has now become part of Gartner. That was where I first had the opportunity to meet Jose, working with him. And I was kind of looking back at the work they've done this year, and they call 2023 the GC's moment. And there's this headline: the GC is at the center of disruption management. So if they define the GC's moment as the GC needs to build the internal governance and provide the clarity to ensure long-term sustainability of revenue streams, and must do that when a major source of uncertainty is legal, political, and social disequilibrium, it makes you think this is a large job, and it's bigger than perhaps it's ever been. So Jose, you kind of talked about the various GC roles and the time that you've been a general counsel. What's changed the most for a GC since the time of your first GC role into now?
So I'd say probably the main thing that's happened is that the whole in-house legal function has, I think, changed quite a bit over the last, probably started before I became a GC, but I would say over the last 20 years. The law department at any organization was a small group of people that sort of sat there, did legal things, and probably a lot of the center of gravity and all the action was really with outside counsel. We've seen over the years, especially as outside counsel rates have gone up so much, that it has really become more cost effective to run really robust legal teams in-house. And I think that started really a movement to professionalize in-house legal teams. I was starting to see that when I was at AIG before I was general counsel for the first time, where we were really developing robust in-house teams that had a broad range of expertise. And so I would say what I've seen the most as far as the function is that there's been a professionalization of the function, that it's being built out as a function like any other function at a corporate, in a corporation. And so as a result, I think legal leaders and in-house leaders have been prompted to act in that regard. So to act as C-suite players within their organizations, to run their functions as a function, and not as a pristine place where a bunch of lawyers give out their opinions and then go back to their corner. So I think we're being held against the same standards as the finance or the risk or any other function that you see at a large corporation. So I think that's been one thing that's kind of prompted this shift. I think the other, and all of these overlap, is that you see a really new cohort of general counsels, of senior in-house leaders that are leaning into other skills beyond the skills beyond just providing legal advice. And so I think that's another area that's kind of moved. There's a lot of people. We've seen GCs take on broader roles. We've seen GCs become CEOs. And I think then on the business side, CEOs and other C-suite leaders are looking for. They see the skills that lawyers bring to the table and can see them providing benefits beyond just providing legal advice. And so we've seen that as well. And I would just add to wrap up is and I think we've seen a bit of a moment, right? There's been so many, the corporation of today deals with so many different things that they weren't dealing with 20 years ago, right? So we've seen COVID, we've seen everything that happened with George Floyd, with Me Too. All these things are these crises that have happened, right? Social media and the speed of how everything happens. These crises provide really fertile ground for solid in-house lawyers to really weigh in. Lawyers are really great at dealing with crisis without panicking, right? At identify issue spotting, identifying problems, and then identifying solutions to those problems and executing. And so I think this has been really recognized by CEOs and by other C-suite leaders, and that has really created an opportunity for attorneys, for in-house lawyers and GCs to really move into a broader role.
So I want to follow up on that last point that you made, Jose, and tie it back to, this conversation is about what do CEOs most value in their legal leaders. So you've been hired by a few different CEOs over the past decade plus. How has what they've been looking for from you shifted in light of some of the things that you're talking about?
Completely. Yeah, I mean, completely. I would say my first GC role, the CEO is really just looking for a lawyer to be able to articulate legal issues and to address them, and to manage the legal team and compliance as well, and the corporate governance issues as well. We were my first GC role. I was the general counsel over a startup, private equity owned startup P&C company, Bermuda based, really London focused. And I would say that's what really they were looking for. But I think quickly they realized it was a startup. So quickly they realized that someone like me had a lot of M&A experience. And so we were acquiring small organizations. They weren't huge acquisitions, but they needed somebody to not only manage the legal affairs and manage outside counsel, but to actually negotiate the deal. And so they quickly saw that they didn't need someone else to negotiate the deal. I could negotiate the deal. And so I think that's where a lot of C-suite leaders, a lot of CEOs have noticed that GCs really bring something to the table. And so I would say in every role that I've had, I've noticed, not just at the companies I've been at, but externally, how there's a higher expectation. And I think part of it is, again, it's hard to identify where it's coming from, but which came first, the chicken or the egg. But I think CEOs have started to recognize that general counsels have these abilities. And then I think also there's a lot of general counsels out there that demonstrate those abilities. So I would say in each role, I've noticed that. And I would just, as an example, at my last role, my CEO told me afterwards, he said to me, Jose, general counsels are built to be CEOs. And he really said, the type of issues that CEOs are dealing with today, a lot of CEOs don't want to deal with those issues. They're operational people who want to deal with the business. They don't want to deal with all this other stuff. He says, but general counsels, but he said, not all general counsels are built to address these types of issues, and so would make wonderful CEOs.
So we won't be surprised to see you on the cover of Fortune as a CEO of some large public company soon. Okay, got it, noted. Will, so if what we're hearing from Jose is the perspective of one GC among many, or at least a GC who's had a few different GC roles, you have this wonderful perspective where you're one person who's worked with hundreds of GCs and their bosses looking to hire them. How does Jose's description of his experience the past decade plus, how does that comport with what you've learned about what are some of the most critical traits, experiences, characteristics, expertise for today's GCs?
Yeah, very aligned. And we just came off of an exercise where our team interviewed a dozen outgoing GCs who had been in role for at least 10 years. They were in the process of retiring or had just retired. And we asked them, the core question was, what changed over the 10 years that you were in the job? which was interesting. But also, we dug into over the course of an hour what was most important for you to bring to the job, and how do you think about succession? And they all shared one really important commonality, and that is the happiest and the longest tenured GCs had a very strong level of trust with the CEO. That relationship was a tight relationship where they each felt comfortable speaking honestly with each other about any issue that the company confronted. It could be personnel issues around the executive leadership team. It could be capital allocation decisions. It could be legal issues. I mean, obviously, they're going to deal with legal issues, reputational issues, and the CEO trusted the GC's judgment and viewpoint and opinion, and felt comfortable bringing them in the very beginning on any material issue, sort of among the top first three, and on any material issue that the company faced. That was one theme that we heard for sure. The other one was that the job, and this is, Jose touched on this, has really expanded. So yes, GCs oversee a legal organization, but many of them have grown their responsibility to include what I would characterize as an umbrella's reputation of the business. So it could be public affairs, it could be marketing, it could be communications, and then there's a lot of other other functions that tend to cluster under the GC, ranging from obviously compliance and risk-related functions all the way, down to facilities and aviation and smaller things that they're probably less hands-on in. But the big theme is around helping manage the reputation of the business in an environment where there's so much new risk emerging. I mean, you think about activist investors. It's not a question of if you have an activist in your stock, it's when. Social media and the empowerment of your customers. You think about what happened to Starbucks. Somebody takes a picture of an inappropriate comment that's printed on their cup. It goes viral, and that lands in the lap of the GC of any big brand or retail consumer business. You think about workforce empowerment. Workers can now communicate globally on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, any movement that otherwise previously would have taken a much bigger effort to voice. Bring in global uncertainty, the relationships with China, the wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine. That has brought global uncertainty and disruption that the GC is in the middle of. So the complexity of the job has risen fivefold over 10 years. And the importance of a trusted relationship with the CEO is just critical. The GC is no longer just the lawyer to the business. Yeah,
for sure. And I'm sure you have these examples, Will, and I won't ask you to name names, but perhaps anything come to mind as you think about somebody who their candidacy for a GC role, or even frankly haven't gotten into the GC role and not really lasted that long, has been derailed because of the failure to either build that trust or to have sort of that multifunctional kind of management capability?
I remember one story that feedback that we got over the course of a search that we did, where the client interviewed several candidates. And there's one candidate that stood out, and we asked the client why that candidate stood out. And they said that she had come in, and whereas a lot of the other candidates wanted to know, what does your litigation docket look like? And, how big is the team? And, who's how much of a rebuild is this, et cetera, et cetera. This candidate spent almost all of their time understanding the culture of the organization. What is the culture of this business? And it was so important to the candidate to understand the values with which the company operated and the alignment of those values with this individual's values, that the CEO walked out and said, this is my person. Like, they care about the right thing, and it is the values of the organization that will drive every other little decision that gets made. And if the values are aligned, then I'm confident that the decisions will be the right decisions.
That's great. And I like what you did there, Will. You pivoted from my trying to get something juicy and you taking it into a positive, value-based conversation. I appreciate that. So Jose, thinking about those first, I don't know, 100 days, maybe?
Yeah.
How do you build that trust with a GC? I imagine some of those GCs you either knew CEO, some of them you knew previously or got to know well during the interview process. Where does that trust building, what are some of the most effective techniques in those early days?
Yeah. Well, I think it begins, well, first of all, I think it begins cultures, infinitely, it's just incredibly important. It is the basis of everything. I wouldn't be in the role that I'm in today if it wasn't for the first conversation I had with our CEO. It was just, there was a connection that was made instantaneously in the first meeting that I had with him. And so I think, look, the first 100 days are incredibly important. Understanding how the CEO works, how he thinks, trying to be, I think, in the same room with the CEO is very important. I started this role during COVID, so that was a bit challenging. But clearly the first few months are really important. Make sure you're also connecting with the rest of the leadership team. I've had this transition now. I've transitioned, I think I've worked for 5 different CEOs at 4 different companies. And I would say that in each one, it's critical. The first 100 days, look, it's really about finding points of mutual connection and then building upon them, understanding what his needs are or her needs are, and then adding that value and distinguishing that value from the value that others are adding within the C-suite team as well. Because I think as attorneys, we do play a different role, and we also are in some ways, above a lot of the other roles, right? And so probably we can be more neutral and more uneven and more focused on what's good for the company. How do I support the CEO's mission? And so I think sending those signals, really making sure that you are distinguishing yourself from everyone else, I think that's probably the most important thing you can do during those first pivotal days.
Yeah, that's great, and it gets to this topic that I know has come up a bit in Will in your work, and as we sort of talked about this discussion, which is sort of the stakeholder management challenge. Internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, the number of stakeholders is just getting larger and larger and larger. Yeah. So as we kind of pivot this conversation from sort of what's changed for the GC and what traits are essential, and thinking more now about navigating company dynamics. And we think about what is it that the CEO, the board, what do other executives need from the GC? One of the things that keeps coming up, right? And Will, you've mentioned a few times, is sort of this comfort with being able to be a manager of the various interests and the various priorities of folks across the C-suite. GC's got a lot of stakeholders. So what does it look like when a GC is able to not be just the traffic cop taking in stuff and telling the company what it can do and what it can't do and how to go about doing that and pointing people in the right direction, but actually become sort of a deeply trusted business advisor to so many parts of the organization? What does it look like? How do they operationalize that?
I think in order to do that, the GC it's critical that the GC has strong relationship cultivation skills and is somebody who cultivates those relationships before there's a problem. So, I mean, you mentioned lots of stakeholders. So let's go through them. You've got your clients, so the business unit leaders. You've got your board of directors. You've got your executive leadership team, your peer group, the regulators. And it's important to have a relationship with the regulators before there's a problem, because that allows you to not be walking in there when you're in the hot seat, but working on that before that happens. You have your team, your legal organization, your competitors. It's important to know your counterparts at competitors. So if there's ever a dispute between your organization and another organization, you can pick up the phone and de-escalate it. So the GC is very much an external role with many of those relationships, and then incredibly important that they have internal relationship development capabilities. Pair that with a need to really understand the business. I talked to one GC, he's 30 days into the job, and he spent his first 30 days on the job in one of the company's factories, learning how they manufactured one of their major products. And it was so that when he goes back to headquarters, he can much more effectively advise the business on the different legal issues that might arise. It's because he understands how it's built, who builds it, what the supply chain looks like, what the sales organization looks like, what the customers care about. So tell me if I've not answered every aspect of the question, but it's an incredibly complex job with tons of stakeholder management, and important to be able to pivot from constituency to constituency and build trust and effective relationships at all those levels.
Yeah,
Right.
I would add just one more to I think I was sort of, mentally jotting down, ticking off my own list as Will spoke. I think the one that I would add or maybe reinforce is the board of directors, because because of our role as typically corporate secretary or overseeing the corporate secretarial function, the board will naturally look towards the general counsel for a lot of things, for a lot of advice and building. But remember, boards of directors are in, if you have, like us, we have meetings 4 times a year. So I see them only 4 times a year, but the crisis can come at any moment. And so building those relationships, not just at the board meetings, but beyond, is critical, because if the day a crisis happens, right, the CEO probably has a very strong relationship with the board chair and with most of the board members, but that CEO is going to need help. And of any of the C-suite leaders, you really do, as a general counsel, have that entree to the board, and the board becomes very important in time of crisis. And so then you can serve as someone who could really help manage that board. Now, how do you do that when you see somebody, 4 times a year, and then interact with them intermittently? Again, the relationship building that Will mentioned is hugely important. I mean, it's really, really important, because it's not just relationship building, but it's quickly communicating to people what you bring to the table. And so even though I'm not dealing with board members that often, they know what I bring to the table. And so, it's something that takes time to build, but it's really it's an investment that's well worth making, because the day you need it, it will really come. There will really be a lot of value.
Yeah, and there's got to be a ton of nuance in there as well, Jose. I mean, we think about all these different stakeholders. We all have our own individual ways of communicating, and we think that it's the best way for us, but every other stakeholder we work with has a different way of hearing information, has a different priority, has a different risk tolerance. So what are, you've sort of answered the first question, which is what are some of those most important relationships that you need to have? And you mentioned the board on top of what Will had also mentioned. But how do you manage that nuance? How, what does it look like when you're really effective and you're able to pivot and not just tell everybody what they want to hear, but what they need to hear in a way that works for them?
I mean, look, you have to have a broad, I think this is something that we're all born with. Some people are obviously better at it and can perfect the skill a little bit faster, but all of us can develop that skill. But it is really, creating, really tailoring your messages, having these bespoke relationships with individuals or with groups of individuals that are really geared towards that group or that individual. And so you need to have, it's not a one size fits all. And so the way I interact with our CFO is based on his function. It's also based on his personality. And so I have to do that with every single stakeholder. I think, Will mention the business people, and that could be a real broad range of personalities, skills, focus. Regulators, obviously those are external stakeholders, but functional leaders. I would, we mentioned the board. I would also mention evolving leaders within the organization, because we can also serve as mentors and sponsors for those folks. So again, it is really about thinking spending a lot of time thinking about how you tailor your approach to each of those individuals or groups of individuals.
Hey, Aaron, I'm gonna
Yeah.
jump in with a question if I can,
Yeah.
which is, and Jose, potentially this is directed towards you and also Will, actually, because what you've been describing is really business judgment, not necessarily legal judgment. And, if you think about a career progression, I know that the world doesn't work quite this perfectly, but I would imagine that, as more, junior lawyers, you're concerned with legal judgment and being accurate or being right, if there is such a thing. And that doesn't necessarily create kind of a natural path to developing business judgment unless you're very intentional about it, or the organization is intentional about helping and developing its teams along those lines, right? What are your thoughts on that? Does that resonate?
I mean, if I could just maybe start that one, I think, yes, 150%. You have to be really intentional. I think all of us as attorneys, or most of us that are on this call, right, are attorneys. We've seen where colleagues of ours, friends, have gotten pigeonholed or focused on one area, and you look at that works for certain people. But that is a bit of the, part of what we all have to do as general counsels is, no doubt, we have to have good legal judgment. We didn't get to these roles without being good lawyers. So that is just an absolutely assumed. But along the way, I think, people like myself and others that I know, I'm sure many people on this call have looked for opportunities to be able to give business judgment, to be able to hone those skills, to sharpen those tools, and to put themselves in situations where they can give business, where they can practice their business judgment. And I think, you do it once, you do it twice, you keep getting better at it, and then people start seeking your business judgment after a while. So I think it is intentional. It needs to be intentional.
That's great. That's great. Well, when you think about that challenge, then sort of the business judgment challenge and positioning folks for the right opportunities that you've been helping them with, what are CEOs looking for, and how do you best position candidates to sort of demonstrate that they've got that business exposure and able to make those sort of business calls on top of the legal insight?
Yeah. I think at a headline, the way I would describe it is CEOs are looking for, as it relates to their business skills, somebody who enables the business. And it's a very nuanced and fine line. If the GC, and I can't imagine that anybody on the call will be surprised to hear this comment, but if the GC's sole role is to raise their hand and say, you can't do that when they're sitting in a room and something comes up that you can't do, then they're not going to get included in the meetings. I mean, they're not going to get invited. But if the role they play is to say, hey, that's going to bring some risk to us, and here's why, but here's another way that we could go about it that would lessen the risk, or that's going to bring some risk to us, and we may be okay with that, but I just want to make you aware of the risk that it brings, then that's the type of business partner and business enabler that they're going to look for. Somebody who can speed the process through which deals get done. So let's not, negotiate. I don't want to show off my legal skills by pointing out that I can find 60 different problems in this contract. Let me just tell you what the 3 that matter are. And let's concentrate on those, and let's not worry about the 57 that are never going to come to fruition. Or, there's litigation here, and I think it's very, very low risk that anything's really going to come of it. So rather than spend a ton of money and do 15 depositions on it, let's just do 3, and let's talk to the 3 most important people, keep our costs down, and just make sure we've got the headlines and the essence of the litigation, as opposed to turning over every single stone. I think those are the types of examples of a business enabling lawyer who will be brought in on more decisions and will over time evolve their business skills. One GC also told me, I asked the question, this is in those interviews that we refer to, what's something that you wish you had done earlier in your career that you did not, something that you had learned? And she said that she wished she had spent more time developing her financial acumen. So the CFO is a key partner. Spend some time or make some investment in learning some of the financial drivers of the business and key financial earlier in your career, some of the key financial learnings that can help you better understand cost of capital and return on capital and capital deployment issues, which will enable you to again combine that legal perspective with some financial understanding that just makes you that much more powerful.
Yeah. We had a conversation with a bunch of RGCs a couple of months ago, and one of them used the phrase. He said, gosh, in 2023, work has become more work. It's the way he phrased it, and I keep thinking about this as we talk about how do we add in sort of these business experiences and the financial acumen. And I'm hearing the voices of Jose's large team of lawyers who are all trying to develop their skills and get ahead and potentially be a GC, and then figuring out like, so now I've got to learn finance. Now I've got to learn that. Now, so how do we create and this is either for Will or Jose, either of you, how do we create those opportunities without overwhelming or distracting our team from what they actually need to get done on the day-to-day, but still giving them those opportunities to develop into the kind of general counsel leader eventually that they want to be?
I mean, I would start that, first of all, not everyone wants that.
Right.
We have to also recognize that not everyone is cut out to be the general counsel. And I think there is a new type of general counsel, and not every general counsel is even cut out for that. Right. I mean, there are general counsels out there that are still very much strictly the legal, focused on legal issues and bringing up legal issues. So I think we recognize that, but I think you will, even at junior levels, see people that are really hungry to start focusing in that area. And I think, work is work, and there's always more of it, but if that's where your passion is, if that's where your interests lie, it's not going to appear like work. It's just going to appear like opportunity. And I think there's always tons of opportunities. When you're in a corporate environment, it's very different than when you're in private practice. But in a corporate environment, there are always lots of issues and opportunities for younger lawyers to get involved. We know amongst ourselves here that the lawyers usually have some of the highest intellect, right, of most people at a corporation. So naturally, problems come up. You need brain power. That there's lawyers that can actually add that brain power. And then if you can apply your legal skills and then shift and pivot over to some of the business points, I think that in itself creates finding those opportunities where there is that ability. It's not that hard, but you do need to have willing participants. You need to have a law department that is in the mix, that's spread out through the business. If it's not an organization that generally allows the lawyers in, you need to, as the leader of the legal department, you need to start making that happen. And then you need to hire teams of people that are actually willing to do that find it not work, that find it to be what their actual passion is.
That's great. And that actually takes us right into sort of that next conversation we wanted to have, which is how do you prepare? How do you prepare yourself? How do you prepare others for a leadership role in a legal department at a large organization? And Jose, I mean, one of the things that stands out as I think about your career and all the time that we've known each other, you've been a very active network builder for yourself personally and for others, but you've also been a very active mentor to up and coming legal leaders. Mentorship is incredibly valuable. I think we've talked about this before. So many people screw that up on both sides of the equation. It's intimidating for somebody who wants to develop in their career to find a mentor. Sometimes the mentor is very excited early on, but then kind of gets distracted and doesn't really stay on top of what the mentee needs. Can you talk a little bit about your experience of being a mentor and thread a little bit of a needle here if you can? We got folks here on the line that I know are current GCs who want to be effective mentors. You also have people who might be looking for one. So kind of hold a few bars on sort of the mentorship challenge and equation there.
Yeah, so interesting, when I've asked about mentorship and my own journey on mentorship, I think what I would signal as the most probably important point on it is the lack of mentorship that I had originally early on in my career. I didn't realize it at the time. I realized it afterwards that there were some people who really had strong, not just mentorship, but sponsorship. and that I didn't have that. I didn't, at the time, like I said, I didn't realize it, but in retrospect, I do. So, but at some point I realized I needed strong mentors and sponsors to help me throughout my career. I could tell you, and anyone could look at my LinkedIn profile and see where I've been. Every single GC role I got, there's someone, I can name you a name of somebody that was behind one or two, sometimes even 3 or 4 people that were instrumental. Clearly, there were recruiters involved in most of those roles, but I'm not talking about the recruiters. I'm talking about people in the industry, people that were in the company already, et cetera, that were out there looking for me, people in private practice. Okay. So I think first of all, be realistic about, do you have mentors or not? And if you don't feel like you have enough or the right people, go find mentors, go identify people to sponsor you, to mentor you, make them your mentor, give them a reason to sponsor you, to mentor you. And so, because I always think it's a two-way relationship, right? They give you something, but you need to give them something in return, which is results, that you actually took their advice, that you follow their lead, that you're giving them feedback, that you're letting them know about your progression, your successes, your challenges. So I think that's really what I would say is that's really important to find. If you don't have them, go find them. On the other side of the coin, how those of us who are leaders can sponsor and help others. Look, I think we all as professionals have that ability. I think one of the things that I feel I bring in my role here and what the CEO really values is that I'm a leader within the organization, and that I'm constantly empowering others for leadership and supporting them in some way to be the best that they can be. And so, as senior in-house folks, I think we have an obligation to find, those talented folks that are out there, not just in our companies, but throughout, who might be junior in-house or outside counsel folks, who are looking for their next role, who are looking for someone to give them direction, and to spend the time. And there's ways like panels like this where you're speaking to a lot of people at one shot, it's being recorded, so somebody will listen to this. And I think I think it's so important for us to talk about this and to really find people. Aaron knows this. I have too many mentees at the moment, and I try to find others to actually mentor some of the people that I mentor, just to make sure that they're getting different perspectives, but also to a bit like move the workload around, right? Get others involved in this process. I think it is really important.
Aaron, we do have a question. I think it would be equally directed towards Jose and Will. Can you talk about the importance of securities experience for securing your first public company GC role? In a situation where you're presented with an opportunity to get a securities role, but one that's a demotion, should you take it, to round out your skill set if you aspire to become part of a public company GC in a GC role?
Great question.
Happy to answer that. I have a strong view, and the answer is yes. When we do a GC search for a public company general counsel, I would say 80% of the time, there is a requirement the person has the securities, the public company, the disclosure experience, the board advisory. Generally speaking, the quote corporate side of the legal balance sheet, that experience. And so even if you're doing it, if it's a demotion, if you're spending 2 years in the weeds dealing with disclosures and understanding those matters, it will presumably not be forever. And you'll come out of that being able to say, hey, I may not be a securities lawyer, but I spent 2 years doing that for my company. And I know the right questions to ask. And, maybe I'm going to have a team member who does that day to day, but I certainly will not be completely blind to those issues. The other box, though, that I think is important to check is a business unit GC role. So when we look for candidates for GC roles, first of all, most of the time they're already GCs and they're moving up from company of a certain size to a company of a larger size. For whatever reason, CEOs are more comfortable with somebody who's been in the job before. But to get into that first GC role, which may be at a smaller company. That's where the entry level tends to start. Having that business unit experience combined with the public company securities experience, I think check most of the must-have boxes, and then it moves into what do you like as a person? What's the chemistry? What's your managerial style? What's your reputation and brand? And it evolves from there.
Yeah, I would add to what everything Will said. I completely agree. So I think many of you know I work with in connection with this initiative with the Hispanic National Bar Association to increase the number of Latino and Latina GCs, and that is the biggest. Everything Will just mentioned we spend time talking about that because it is a huge challenge. I know personally it was challenging to get my first public company GC role because I didn't have securities, I didn't have a public board experience, I had board experience, and those two were killer. Like there were roles that I just wouldn't be looked at. They would not include me on the panel, even though I would start giving 50 other reasons why I thought I was a good candidate. Now, so my only 2 words of advice, the business role, I had that, so I would always talk that one up a lot. And I would say, because I think sometimes people get a bit discouraged by it, it's a little bit like, how do I, if I never get the opportunity, how can I demonstrate that I can do this role? Look, I think it's about being really persistent and finding that road. And the road may not be direct. And you know what, but if you keep looking at a problem and thinking of different angles, right, you can almost always get to a solution. And in my case, I ended up becoming the GC of a public company that was majority owned, was a controlled company by a bigger public company. So they didn't think the public company piece of it was that important. They liked my business unit role, right? They wanted somebody with a lot of insurance experience. And so that got me the first public company role, that then when this role came up, it was not a question. I had the public company experience, even though it was not at a fully public company like Equitable is. So I think it's about really, working, obviously highlighting the most important parts of your background, and talking through some of the other. If you haven't been a public company, if you haven't had a public board, well, you've had a non-public board, right? You just keep talking about how you think your skills can get there. And I'm sure Will tell you, every search is different, and everyone, there's different amounts of what they want. And maybe you'll get to that one where maybe the public company isn't so important, or maybe they're really focused on the business unit, or there's something. I do agree also that if there is roles, I would have I probably had more opportunity in front of me, but I have advised folks to take lateral roles that give them that securities experience as well, because I didn't have that either. And I think I've given people that advice to take lateral roles just to get that experience. And I think that's valuable.
That's great.
I'll add one thing is, just always raise your hand. Like that, you need to have diversity of experience. The more that you have, and the more that it's apparent that your current employer has invested in you, the more attractive a candidate you will be. So raise your hand, get involved in different things, take on more, find that mentor in the organization who's going to help you get the growth opportunities, and run at them and do a great job.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yep.
Sorry, Harry, I don't mean to keep jumping in. There's a follow-on question, which I'll pivot back to mentee and mentor relationships. Will, since you gave me a little bit of a segue there, this is for Jose. That you're so right that mentorship is a two-way street. How do you handle a situation where the mentee is not meeting you halfway? I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but I'm interested in your response.
I should turn it to you. And when the mentee, I think you give people, you sometimes, we need to be told directly what we're doing wrong. And I've had mentee situations where I've told the person, well, you need to be really approaching this in a different way. And if that doesn't work, honestly, move on to another mentee, because there are so many hungry men. I could tell you, if someone on this call needs a mentee, please call me, because there are so many people that are hungry to be supported by others. I mean, it really is. There's so many people out there. So I think, not everyone's cut out to be a good mentee, but I think you give people the benefit of the doubt and try to coach them into being a good mentee, and then move on if that doesn't work.
And then a quick follow-up on that then, Jose, which is, you said something before, which I think is pretty consistent when you hear about the mentor-mentee relationship, which is it's got to be worthwhile for the mentor as well. You got to be able to give them something. I think you gave some good examples of what that looks like over the course of the mentorship relationship. But what about that first conversation? What's like a practical thing that a potential mentee can offer, if you will, to get the attention of a mentor to say, this will also be valuable for you. There's something else that I can provide for you.
Look, I think people are flattered by being asked their advice. I think a lot of times in my career, people that were my mentors didn't even realize it. And so it is a little bit of it's like a dating process there, right? You're trying to get, so it's a bit of relationship building, but I think it really focuses on being curious about the person's skill, their own journey, right? Their own career journey, and trying to delve into their experiences and how those experiences you can apply them. And I think where the person then feels like they're getting something from it, I mean, this is just quickly thinking here. I think it's about, in some way, and maybe even during that first conversation, is validating what they tell you, right? Not just just hearing what they say, but validating it in some way. Oh yeah, I think that's really interesting. I'm going to try it in this way, or I've tried that before and it really works. So it is a bit of validation. I think mentors and sponsors are really flattered and want to be able to help. It's not just flattery, but it's about that you show that they have value. Sometimes they don't even realize that they have value. I think a lot of us don't realize that our accomplishments are valuable. And so when you're validating it as the mentee, I think it really catches the attention of the mentor and really gets them to work harder for you.
I would also say, think about mentors outside of legal. It does not have to be another
no, for sure.
It could be a supply chain leader. It could be a business unit leader. It could be somebody from finance. And you might find that those lunches are, exponentially more valuable because you are learning from somebody who has a completely different skill set than you.
Yeah, for sure. And especially the more senior you are, the more the shift on, the balance between mentors that are in the law and that are outside the law. Somebody like me should have more mentors outside the law than in the law at this point. And so I think
they'll see things about you that the other lawyers will not see.
Correct.
That's great. I was going to go down a path of talking a little bit about sort of working with a recruiter, and that can be similarly intimidating to working with a mentor or finding a mentor. Though, Will, you are certainly not intimidating. Not my point. But I do want to make sure, because we do have a question that came in. I want to make sure we had a chance to address that. So let's take that up, which says, what are your tips for helping a new CEO build relationships with the board and the executive team? So we've been talking all about what does the CEO need from the GC? How about the other way around? How do we help a new CEO build those relationships with the board and executive team?
I could start on this one. So if I understand the question correctly, I mean, look, I think, and I've had only one situation where I had a new CEO, but I think it's really about being generous. So presumably that general counsel's been building relationships throughout his or her tenure, right? And so, like in any social situation, you basically give your relationships away. You basically bring that person into your relationship with that person, whether it's the board or the other C-suite members. And I think not everyone does that naturally, but think of all of us having joined an organization or a group, whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be a job necessarily. When there's someone there who is facilitating your integration, I mean, it is one of the strongest ways to drive a relationship and to create a bond quickly. And I think that's, I do it. I could tell you I do it with board members. For instance, when board members come in, they're new board members, they absolutely love you, because if you onboard them and then get them socialized quickly within the organization and give them a bit of the ropes, right, of the unwritten curriculum, I think that is just, that just really applies to it. That's really a lot about relationship building in general. But I think for a CEO, it's incredibly powerful. A CEO wants to succeed, and will be quickly sizing up who's helping, who's in his or her camp and who's not, and who can really help them get up to speed as quickly as possible. Because if I had 100 days, they only have about 30 before they need to really start demonstrating value, building credibility. So, that's what I would say. I think it's a great opportunity for a general counsel when a new CEO comes on board.
What I was going to add is just make sure they understand the history. Like, sit them down and say, here is how we got to where we are, and this is what you need to know about each of these board members and their history and the relationships and the dynamics and what might have gone wrong and what might have gone well. I'm thinking, and I'm tying it to, I've got an individual who's interviewing for a GC role at a very large public company right now. And it's a company that has historically promoted from inside, from within. And this is an outside candidate. And the last time this company had an outside candidate, it went horribly wrong. And it was a long time ago that this happened. And I said to the candidate, I said, you need to understand going in that there may be an incredible bias towards not going outside again and making that same mistake. And so one of your questions should be, hey, what has gone wrong in the past when you've recruited from the outside? Why hasn't it worked out? And how can I comfort you that that won't happen again, that you're comfortable, going back outside? And and this is a long time ago that this happened. The candidate's like, oh my gosh, I totally forgotten about that. But that story is pretty well known. And you're right, I need to address that. So like helping a new CEO understand things that went on before, so they can ask questions about that and address it and avoid it. I think that sort of coaching and seeing around corners is helpful to them.
Seeing around corners, you're telegraphing where we're going to go next to close off this conversation. So I know Lee is going to bring us home in just a minute. So let's do a quick super lightning round, sort of last final thought here from both of you, which is if what we always constantly hear from CEOs about their GCs, that I need the GC to be able to see around the corners. They say about outside counsel, they say about their in-house lawyers. That is the biggest, most valuable thing that they can provide. So give us a little bit of what we need to see. What does a CEO need to be thinking about that's around the corner, that's currently on the GC's radar, that perhaps the CEO isn't thinking about? I'll start with Jose.
Okay.
Your
look,
CEO.
Yeah. So I think this is where we have to be really disciplined in what we do. Presumably, someone like myself has a huge legal team that's dealing with the legal issues every day. I think it's really all about, it's a multitude of things. It could be political, social, industry issues. Companies like ours that have been around for 160 years, we still, every day we got to prove ourselves to all our stakeholders, our investors, our employees, and our customers. And so I think it's really about just continuing to make sure that you're in tune, that you're reaching out, that you're extending yourself beyond the company, and make sure you're really getting information as quickly as possible to make sure that you are in tune to changes. Things can happen overnight, and we just need to be constantly not looking in, but looking out.
Yeah, great. Will, one thing around the corner should be on the CEO's radar?
At the risk of jumping onto the bandwagon of the most obvious thing is I think AI is going to be transformational over the next decade, and the GC needs to be a little bit of an anchor on the organization's drive to implement AI. There's a lot of risk with it, and if somebody's going to dial back the exuberance, it probably will be legal. And finding the right balance there is tricky, but that's my one thing.
Dial back
You
the
might-
exuberance. I love
Yeah,
it.
you might not be the most popular person.
I know.
So that's the trick.
Well, great. This has been fun and wide ranging. We've covered a lot of ground. Lee, I'll hand it over to you to kind of take us home.
Super job, Aaron. And really, Jose and Will, you both have so much to add. Everyone on this who's participating today has hopefully gathered a few really key insights. And since within a half an hour of leaving this call, you may forget everything, the key things you heard, jot them down in an email to yourself so you remember, because they're so valuable when the time comes to use them. So thanks you all for putting on, and Sandy Devine as well, for putting on a great Global Counsel Leader session. I have a last minute pitch, which is that our new member campaign is starting for individual members. So you'll be hearing about that soon if you're here. And it's a great way to end the year for Global Counsel Leaders with these two programs. So take care, everyone.